Imagine for a moment the world around you exploding. Not a metaphorical explosion, but a literal, shattering, deafening roar of war tearing your entire existence apart. That's what it felt like on December 7th, 1941, as Japanese bombs rained down on Pearl Harbor. I was just a kid, really. A 20-year-old ensign, one of the youngest pilots stationed there. And in a matter of minutes, everything I knew, everything I'd trained for, was engulfed in fire and chaos. The sky was filled with enemy planes, the ground shook with explosions and the screams. Oh God. The screams of men dying, of metal twisting, of the very fabric of peace being ripped to shreds. My plane, my beloved P-40 Warhawk, was supposed to be grounded. An easy target, but something inside me, some primal instinct, screamed that I had to fly. Was I a fool for thinking I could make a difference against such an overwhelming force? Or was it the only sane reaction to an insane situation? Tell me, if you were there watching your friends die, your country attacked, would you have done the same thing? The day had started like any other beautiful Hawaiian Sunday. The air was warm. The sun was just beginning to climb, casting golden light over the turquoise waters of Pearl Harbor. I'd woken up early, buzzing with that restless energy only a young pilot feels. My best friend, Kenneth Taylor, or Ken as everyone called him, was supposed to play golf that morning. Ken was a year older than me, already a second lieutenant and practically my older brother. We'd gone through flight school together, shared countless late-night conversations about flying, about the future, about the girls we hoped to marry someday. He was sharp, confident, and had a laugh that could fill a hangar. We were both stationed at Wheeler Army Airfield, just a few miles inland from Pearl Harbor itself. Our P-40s were lined up wing to wing on the tarmac, pristine and powerful, ready for whatever simulated dogfights the week might bring. I remember thinking about the letter I'd gotten from my mother the day before, asking if I was eating enough, if I was keeping out of trouble. I smiled to myself, imagining her fussing. I was a world away, a fighter pilot, not some schoolboy. Little did I know, those innocent thoughts were about to be obliterated. I was in the mess hall, grabbing a quick breakfast, probably complaining about the powdered eggs, when the first explosions hit. It wasn't just one. It was a cascade. A rapid-fire series of thundering booms that rattled the very foundations of the building. We all froze, forks halfway to our mouths. Someone yelled, "What the hell was that?" And then the ground shuddered again, closer this time, and the windows rattled violently. Before anyone could truly process it, the unmistakable sound of machine gun fire ripped through the air, followed by the terrifying, high-pitched whine of dive bombers. It wasn't an exercise. This was real. This was war. Panic erupted. Men scrambled, overturning chairs, their faces contorted in confusion and terror. I remember the look on the cook's face, a man who'd seen everything, now utterly bewildered. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the rising crescendo of destruction. I bolted out of the mess hall, pushing through the throng of terrified soldiers, my only thought to get to the flight line. As I ran, the sky above Wheeler Field was already filled with enemy planes, their distinctive rising sun insignia chillingly clear against the bright Hawaiian morning. Zeros. Hundreds of them, it seemed, swarming like angry hornets. They were strafing our barracks, our hangars, our planes. Our planes. My P-40, my only way to fight back, was out there, vulnerable. I saw anti-aircraft fire begin to erupt, pathetic puffs of smoke against the overwhelming force, and then a direct hit on one of the hangars. A fireball erupted, sending a shockwave that almost knocked me off my feet. The smell of burning fuel and flesh already permeated the air, a stench that would forever be etched into my memory. As I sprinted towards the flight line, I heard Ken's voice, loud and clear, cutting through the din. "Al, over here!" He was already out there, waving frantically, dodging bullets, his golf clothes starkly out of place amidst the chaos. He'd barely made it out of the shower when the attack started, thrown on whatever he could find. We met near our assigned parking spots, a scene of absolute devastation. Our beautiful P-40s, parked neatly in rows, were being systematically torn apart. Bombs hit with sickening thuds, turning metal into shrapnel, fuel into infernos. Flames licked at the aircraft. Smoke billowed into the pristine morning sky, turning it a sickly gray. "They're destroying everything," I yelled over the roar of the engines and explosions, my voice raw with disbelief and rage. "We have to get a plane up, Ken." "We have to." He nodded, his eyes wide but determined. "I know, Al, follow me. We'll find one that's still flyable." We dodged explosions, ran past burning wreckage, the heat searing our faces. The Japanese pilots were flying so low I could see their faces, their goggled eyes as they unleashed their fury. It was a terrifying, surreal dance with death. We reached our designated area, only to find our plane's P-40B models already shot to pieces or engulfed in flames. My stomach dropped. It felt like a punch to the gut. This couldn't be happening. We were pilots. We were supposed to fly, but Ken, bless his stubborn heart, wasn't giving up. There, he pointed, his arm slicing through the smoke. Over there, behind the hangar. There are some C models, maybe they're less damaged. We ran again, adrenaline coursing through our veins, our breath ragged in our chests. We stumbled over debris through puddles of water mixed with oil, narrowly avoiding a collapsing section of a building. When we reached the far side of the field, it was a miracle. Tucked away, almost forgotten in the pandemonium, were two P-40C models, still intact, though their tails had been clipped by shrapnel from a nearby explosion. They were sitting ducks, but they were there. They're flyable, Al. Ken shouted, a wild, exhilarated look on his face. Get yours started. I'll be right behind you. There was no time for pre-flight checks, no time for anything but sheer instinct. We scrambled into the cockpits, the smell of aviation fuel and fear filling the confined space. The ground crew, those who hadn't been killed or wounded, were now racing towards us, some yelling, "Don't do it. It's suicide." Others just staring in stunned silence. But we couldn't hear them, not really. All I could hear was the roar of the attacking planes and the desperate pounding of my own heart. I fumbled with the controls, my hands shaking, but my training kicked in. Ignition. Engine cranked. Smoke billowed from the exhaust. And then, with a glorious guttural roar, my Allison V1710 engine coughed to life. It was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. I looked over at Ken. His engine was sputtering, trying to catch. The air was thick with bullets. One Xeno made a low pass, strafing the area near us. Bullets chewed up the tarmac, sending sparks flying. Ken hunched over, working the controls with furious desperation. Finally, his engine caught, roaring to life just like mine. There was no time for radio checks, no time for a tower clearance that wouldn't come. We were on our own. We taxied out onto the decimated runway, dodging craters and burning wreckage. It was a nightmare obstacle course. I glanced at Ken's plane, seeing his determined profile through the canopy. We were two young men, two specks against a sky full of enemies, about to launch ourselves into the heart of a full-scale assault. It was the most terrifying yet strangely exhilarating moment of my life. My stomach churned, a mixture of fear and pure, unadulterated rage. I remember thinking about those letters again, the ones from home. The innocent thoughts of Sunday mornings. All gone, all changed, forever. We reached the usable section of the runway practically side by side. I throttled up, pushing the stick forward, and felt the familiar surge of power as the P-40 began its desperate dash. The wheels lifted off, the ground leaving the inferno behind, and I was airborne. I was flying. So that's the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have stayed grounded, followed orders, waited for the storm to pass, or would you have defied death itself, taken to the skies in a desperate, almost suicidal attempt to fight back? Would you have abandoned the possibility of survival for the slim chance of making a difference? Think about it truly. What would your courage have commanded? As soon as my wheels left the runway, I banked hard, climbing into the smoky, bomb-filled sky. Ken was right there with me, a shadow, a brother in arms. We didn't have to say a word. Our intentions were clear. We were going to fight. We were going to try. The air was thick with danger. Zeros were everywhere, their silver wings glinting in the morning sun, their machine guns spitting fire. It was like flying into a hornet's nest. I spotted a formation of dive bombers heading straight for the naval base. Without a second thought, I pushed my P-40 into a dive, my heart pounding like a drum against my ribs. My finger instinctively went to the trigger. I was a fighter pilot, and this was my fight. My guns barked, sending a stream of .50 caliber rounds towards the enemy. One of the Japanese bombers, surprised by this rogue attacker, broke formation. I pressed the attack, closing the distance, lining up my shot. The bomber's tail gunner opened fire, tracers streaking past my cockpit, but I held steady. A burst of my rounds tore into its engine, and black smoke streamed from its fuselage. It wobbled, then spiraled downwards, a dark plume against the blue. sky eventually crashing into the distant hills, a faint explosion marking its demise. My first kill. A rush of grim satisfaction, quickly followed by the sobering realization that this was just one. There were so many more. Ken was already engaged, a whirlwind of a pilot, dodging and weaving, a true artist in the sky. He had a 0 on his tail, its guns chattering, but Ken pulled a sharp maneuver, rolling hard, and the 0 overshot him. He was relentless, fearless. He always was. We worked as a team, unspoken communication flowing between us, a bond forged in training now tested in the crucible of war. I saw Ken get a 0 on his own tail, and without hesitation I swooped in, guns blazing, forcing the enemy pilot to break off his attack. The 0 banked sharply to avoid my fire, and Ken took the opportunity, turning sharply and unleashing a devastating burst into the enemy plane's engine. That 0 too plummeted from the sky, a fiery comet, another victory for our desperate defiance. The Japanese pilots, initially surprised by our presence, now focused their attention on us. 2 P-40s against what felt like the entire Imperial Japanese Navy Air Service. It was insane, reckless, but we didn't care. We were fueled by anger, by grief, by an overwhelming desire to protect our home, our friends, our country. I engaged another 0, a deadly dance of cat and mouse in the smoky sky. He was good, very good, but I was fueled by righteous fury. I twisted and turned, using every trick I'd learned in flight school, pushing my P-40 to its limits. Finally, I got him in my sights, a perfect deflection shot, and a torrent of bullets ripped through his wing. He spun out of control, a broken bird, and slammed into the ocean with a colossal splash. The battle raged for what felt like an eternity, but in reality, it was probably only an hour or so. The sheer adrenaline made time irrelevant. We flew until our ammunition was almost gone, until our planes were riddled with bullet holes, until the roar of the Japanese engines began to recede, their mission of destruction seemingly complete. When the last enemy plane finally disappeared over the horizon, leaving behind a scarred sky and a devastated harbor, Ken and I circled over the ruins of Wheeler Field. The airfield was a smoldering wreck, our hangars gutted, our planes obliterated. It was a scene of utter devastation, a stark reminder of the horror we had just witnessed and, incredibly, survived. We had nowhere safe to land at Wheeler. With barely enough fuel left and our planes damaged, we made the incredibly risky decision to fly to Halewa Field, a small auxiliary strip further north which we hoped would be less damaged. The landing was rough, our planes limping onto the makeshift runway, but we made it. We climbed out of our cockpits, our bodies aching, our ears ringing, our uniforms soaked with sweat and oil. The first thing I did was look at Ken. He was pale, his eyes still wide with the intensity of the fight, but he had that familiar stubborn glint. We just looked at each other for a long moment, 2 young men who had stared death in the face and against all odds spit back. We had flown for a little over an hour, but in that hour, we had claimed 6 enemy aircraft between us. 6. Against hundreds. It was a tiny dent in the overwhelming attack, a mere ripple in the tsunami of war, but it was something. We had fought back. We had shown them that even in the darkest hour, the American spirit would not break. The aftermath was a blur of debriefings, medical checks, and the horrifying realization of the true cost of that morning. We learned the extent of the damage, the thousands of lives lost, the ship sunk, the future irrevocably changed. Ken and I were hailed as heroes, but it didn't feel like heroism. It felt like a desperate act of survival, a visceral need to avenge our fallen comrades. We were just 2 kids who got lucky, who had the planes that were barely flyable and the sheer audacity to go up against the might of the enemy. We continued to serve, both of us. Ken went on to fly in combat for the rest of the war, a decorated ace, eventually retiring from the Air Force as a brigadier general. I, too, continued to fly, seeing action in various theaters, carrying the lessons of Pearl Harbor with me in every engagement. That day, December 7, 1941, was a day of destruction, a day of infamy. But for Ken and me, it was also a day of unbreakable courage, a testament to the raw, visceral human spirit that refuses to surrender. Even when all hope seems lost, We faced overwhelming odds, chaos, and death, and we chose to fight. We chose to rise, we chose to defy. Looking back all these years later, I still remember every detail of that morning. The smell of smoke, the roar of the engines, the fear, and the unyielding determination. It shaped who I became, who we all became. It taught me that even in the darkest moments, there is always a chance to fight, to stand for what's right, and to make a difference no matter how small. It solidified the bonds of brotherhood, the kind of bond that only forms under the most extreme pressure. The memory of Ken, laughing on the golf course, then grimly determined in the cockpit, is something I will carry always. That day was the beginning of a new chapter for our nation, a chapter written in fire and blood, but it was also a testament to the courage of individuals, to the unwavering American spirit that refused to be bowed. So I leave you with this story. A story of two young pilots, two friends who dared to fly when the world was burning. Like this video if you were on my side. If you believe in the power of courage against impossible odds, subscribe for more stories like this. Stories of ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Tell me truly, what would you have done? I'll see you all in the next story.